So, hey guys, this is the Werewolf 20th Anniversary Edition sort of retrospective Q&A. We hope you guys have some cues.
I have cues.
You have plenty of cues? So, trying to remember how we got started last time. We were talking about
people
this.
because we got yelled at
Yes,
doing that last
exactly. So,
by somebody in this room.
on my right, Eddie Webb, whom you've all heard with his wonderful presentation, the last hour and a half of which we had.
45 minutes, my iPad told me.
Yeah, it lied. Matt McElroy, both writer and our representative from Drive-Thru RPG and Flames Rising. Rich Thomas, creative director of Onyx Path and White Wolf for many years. And Bill Bridges, the...
Ever illustrious.
Which one of the wizards do you prefer to be?
The what?
Radagast, right?
Radagast.
Yes, right.
The Radagast of Flight.
Ivanhoe.
He loves all the animals and the beasties and the...
And he now is a sled pulled by giant rabbits, according to the Hobbit trailer.
Okay. That's... I hadn't seen that. So, Bill, of course, being long time werewolf developer and also one of the guys writing on this 20th anniversary book. So I know last year did a little book called V20, Vampire 20th Anniversary Edition, and that went okay. And so we thought, why don't we do another one? Because oddly enough, in the way these things were released, one each year, now that it's a year later, it's Werewolf's turn. It's 20 years since we did Werewolf. So started working on that pretty much when we got back from Grand Masquerade last year. We started working on Werewolf 20. And,
Yeah, we talked.
And you'd think after all that time we'd have it done, but...
Yeah, we talked initially about it when, we've told the story before, but the day before Gen Con,
Right.
Rich and I got to go ahead to talk about Werewolf 20, so we're hastily adding slides to our presentation so we could talk about it at Gen Con. And then we talked a little bit about where we're going with it, but I think you're right. It was really, let's focus to get V20 out the door and in everyone's hands. And then at Grand Masquerade, we started the conversation with some people, specifically some of the guys from Brew Nation and some other kind of knots of Apocalypse fans, just kind of prodding to pump things going. And then we came back and me, Bill, Ethan, and Rich got some meeting room time. We started just kicking around what was important about the werewolf experience and what was iconic about it. And something that was really great when Justin started to work on V20 was digging into, okay, this is the most important thing. These are the hits. And let's focus on making sure those bits are drawn out and made as iconic and representative as possible. And so that's one thing we want to do is get to that stage with Werewolf and what's the most awesome bits.
Yep. And Ethan would love to have been here, but he actually has a job that he couldn't get out of.
Stupid work.
And this was the day we got on the schedule to do this. So, but Ethan has shouldered most of the heavy lifting on the development end. He, unlike Eddie and Justin, who pretty much wrote V20 all by their lonesomes with some assists from Russ Bailey and Matt McFarlane.
And Russell.
I think it's Russ Bailey.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'm deaf.
Yeah, and if guys, if at any point in this vast room you can't hear me or any of the guys, just put your hand up or say, "What did you say?" Because we're going to probably lapse into conversations that just kind of drift. So, in this case, Ethan was able to reach out to a whole slew of talented writers, and so. As our sort of our situation with CCP changed and Werewolf 20 came into the Onyx Path, Eddie was no longer able to simply sit down and write the whole thing on
right.
on the company's dime. So it's very tough. Who's writing that? Do you remember?
Jess. Oh, geez.
Jess Hartley.
Yeah, Jess Hartley.
Stu Wilson.
Stu Wilson.
You guys probably remember the names better than I do.
Phil Mercado.
Right.
Yeah, Phil did some writing.
Phil did some writing on it.
Holden Shearer did the gifts.
Holden's
right.
An insane and quick amount of gifts.
Yeah. I did the renown system. I worked on it.
Mm-hmm.
Bill worked on the comic book script.
Yeah, example play also, and survey of rage across the world.
Right.
Right.
I'm sure somebody were missing, but I think that was I think it was the key. Oh, Farland, Matt Farland.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, Matt McFarland.
Yeah,
Pass
Matt.
that around. Yeah, if you guys want to, this is I think we put this together from this is initial layout, but it's nevertheless. So just some sample pages from the tribe section. It is also bound incorrectly.
I was going to say, did you bound correctly this time?
No, this is the exact same one. And so like the 2-page spreads of the tribes are supposed to be 2-page spreads, but they're not in that because Kinko's is dumb. So
This is recorded.
So while that was going on, they were assembling, they were fine tuning. One of the tools that we had to use that Justin really put to the forefront when we did V20 was the open development process.
Yeah.
And so we were able to have Ethan started posting different things that they were working on, questions they had. A lot of times what we'll do now is somebody will say, hey, I think we should change this around. And then all the developers will start to kind of, writers will talk in Google or whatever we're using at the time. And 9 times out of 10 now, instead of somebody making a decision going, okay, we're just going to do it this way, someone will say, hey, why don't we put this up for open dev and see what everybody thinks about it? We'll get that out there. Then we can actually have people who use this material and enjoy this material and have done so for 20 years actually come back and tell us, you know what, yeah, we know that's dumb, but we love it. Or, my God, we don't really care about this, please fix it. And so,
I know one of the biggest examples of that, it got mirrored a little bit in W20, but it happened at V20 specifically was Justin and I were talking about changing the die mechanics, the dipole system. Justin's like, this is broken, difficulty 10 is stupid, we should really look into making this work better. And you and I are both like, yeah, no, absolutely, should think that. And then we went to open dev, and players were like, no, that wacky bell curve is part of the experience for me. And we're just like, wait, what? Really?
Trying to fix the game. Nah, we don't want that.
No, seriously, I want to explode when I roll all my dice. It's like, really? Okay, and that was overwhelmingly that was the response. It's like, okay, so that's a case where it's like, we're actually not going to touch that. So there's certainly been times in open development where it was a case of, let's not do anything with that because the fans are really, really attached to a particular way or a particular aspect of this game. And so rather than us dictating, well, no, you're playing it wrong, so you should play it this way, it's no, let's open up these options and let people dig into what they really find fascinating rather than what we think they find fascinating.
and I think there's a natural tendency on the part of writers and developers to want to fine tune and improve and do something better than they did 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. 20 years ago we did it this way. Come on, we must have changed. We've gotten a better way by now. But that's not really what these anniversary editions are about. These anniversary editions are about, this is a compilation and a slightly fresh coat of paint to the things that we all loved about it.
Can I give the car analogy?
Please give your car analogy.
Rich loves this analogy. I was trying to find a way to explain this to people when I worked at World 20, and ultimately hit on, it's like getting a classic sports car, you get like a 60 Chevy or whatever. You may change the suspension, you may fix up the interior, you may change a coat of paint on it, but you want that classic car experience while you're buying a classic car. You don't want to put a GPS screen on there, you don't want to put like your MP3 iPad connector in there because that's not what we got this car for. You want to have the cigarette lighter in it. You want to, that's what the experience wants. So you may make it safer and you may make it a little easier to run and a little easier to handle, but you don't want to change that car's experience.
Right.
Oh, that's such a Weaver analogy, cars and stuff.
I know, but
You want the wild in there, and that's why everybody likes the 10s.
blah blah shaman crap.
Bill, it's like he has a tree you really love. And
And there's a
He grows
hippie standing
branches.
next to the tree.
Without shoes. Oh my God.
And he's crying.
it's Link. So, and I think that's the one of the things to really bear in mind is how important how people feel about the anniversary editions and is informing what we're doing. It's very much an emotional thing, and we ran into this with V20, and this is the another story we used over and over again, which is nobody had seen what it was going to look like, and I just did a mock-up to show what I was thinking about for what the V20 was going to look like. And I went back to, basically said, trying to remember what I was thinking back then when I was doing the layout for Vampire. I was like, okay, I would do this and I would do this, and I pulled the old font, Delavan,
Oh yeah.
and used that as the headers. And Shane, who's, you know, a vampire, he looked at it and had this surreal response looking at the page, and this is so beautiful. It's so, it's because of this font. It's just like coming back home. And I think that's a really, really important part of what we're looking at when we do these is not necessarily creating something from whole cloth, but actually trying to distill what is going to make you feel like you're going back home, like the first time you open up a werewolf book, the first time you open up a vampire book. So that's definitely a big part of our process. At the same time that the writing is all starting to rev up and blogs are being posted and things like that, I was reaching out to a lot of the werewolf writers and artists, and of course one of the first guys that I contacted was Ron Spencer. Ron lives with about 14 kids, all his, in like a compound in Nebraska or somewhere out where they have a lot of corn. And he's a very, very fun guy to talk to. But most importantly, we never had him do the full page pieces for any of the core books for Werewolf, not first, second, or revised edition. So this was the time. This is the thing, and I don't think anybody no artist epitomizes Werewolf in the same way that Ron does. I mean, if you look, he's been there from the get-go, and just amazingly, werewolves. You look at his, and those are just going to leap off the page. So Ron was cool with it. He was up for it. If anybody saw the sketches that I was putting up on the Werewolf, I know you did, Werewolf vlogs. It was a process. It was a very interesting process, and I really appreciated getting the feedback from the fans on the things that worked for them and didn't work for them in Ron's sketches. And I think you're going to see that as the full pages show up in the book. That, you know, Ron really did listen to that, and we were able to make some pretty good decisions on that. Some things like Albrecht.
Oh yeah.
And what's he supposed to look like at this point? Do we want King Albrecht? Do we want Lord Albrecht? Do we want Albrecht with the paper bag full of booze and the dirty trench coat?
Drunk Albrecht.
Drunk Albrecht. So that's it. He's just like this. He's in the shower.
I would totally play drunk Albrecht. I used to be a king, you know.
Ex-King Albrecht. Yeah, we actually moved him forward in time. Now he's... Yeah. His beard's down to here. So that was happening, and then there were some artists that I managed to get in touch with who made a lot of sense. They were definitely werewolf guys, like Brian LeBlanc, who never lost touch with Brian. Brian did the full pagers in second edition, as well as just tons and tons and tons of work. Jeff Holt, who's done tons and tons of work, was my roommate for 3.5 years in Atlanta, so I totally know where he is. Other guys I had to search for. I dug up Drew Tucker, who's a great magic artist if you follow him there, but also did tons and tons and tons of work in Werewolf. Dug up Brian Wackwitz, who was a very first edition of Werewolf artist, and also Jeff Rebner, who is, if you recall the crazy art that Jeff Rebner did, is all over the place. A master of Freak Legion stuff. And Jeff, still on King of the Hill, he's an animator and such, who's been working on that show.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I think they're winding down or something.
I think it's your last season.
He's like, I think I'll make the jump over to something else. I don't know.
The high-paced world of RPG art.
Yeah, but I mean, and these were guys. They were just so excited about it. And then, in a really weird thing, as we say, hey, Facebook can sometimes be good. For Vampire, I had tried to find John Cobb. If you know who I mean, anything the most twisted, bizarre, guys all like
He's
this.
an easy guy.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, all Dark Ages is better.
Tried to find John to get him on V20. I could not find him. I looked everywhere. I plugged in John Cobb all over Facebook. Just, it's a lot of John Cobbs, and I couldn't see anything that matched. And then Facebook came up with a friends you might like, and it was John Cobb Artworks. Was the name of his Facebook page. He's actually. Thank you, Facebook, for giving me him, but also really I couldn't have. So.
Oh, that John Cobb.
Yeah, so I sort of, I'm still not sure it's him, right? Because I'm looking at the art on the site, and of course it's, probably at least 10 years since we've used John, and his style is kind of, he's going into his own thing that he's into. It's his personal art, sort of stuff. So I call him, is this the John Cobb that used to work for White Wolf? Oh yeah. Hey John, it's Rich Thomas. Nothing. I'm like, oh crap. Did we leave on bad terms and I just forgot? And then he just starts laughing and he's like, it is so great to hear. And we just talked and talked. So that's one of the great things about working on this. I don't know if you guys get a chance to, like with V20, if there was reuniting with friends you hadn't played with for a while or because of the book or anything like that, but we certainly love working again with people that we haven't worked with for a long time. And so that's kind of how that gets started.
Have you been working with Anson Maddox?
I haven't. Anson's really hard to get in touch with. Really hard.
Really hard.
Really hard.
Check his
Like
Facebook page.
he actively doesn't like to talk about doing art. Like, I mean, the Magic guys have the same issue with him.
Really?
Yeah. So, and not that he doesn't do art, he just doesn't like
Advertising.
getting. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like he's selling out if he's doing that. So. But also awesome guy. But I was really the thing about it is Anson wasn't in the original Werewolf run, right? I mean,
I couldn't remember if
I really don't think we used him as. I think we used him on Wraith. Okay, so the core idea behind that being getting classic feel for Werewolf. There were some artists that I considered getting and I didn't. And I'm no surprise to anybody. I desperately searched all of Australia for my friend Scar, but they were not to be found. I didn't. That was the one thing that was off the table. We weren't going to use those guys. So that was that, and so started figuring out what kind of art we needed. It was still before the book was really being written, so there's a lot of, hey, can you send me a chapter as it gets done so I can go through for different ideas for it, especially like for the gifts chapter. I always like, same thing I did for the disciplines chapter. I like to get those written up and hand them out to the artists, because then you're really, you've got the one chapter that is absolutely tied in. It's, the art is going to be depicting something that's going on on the page, and I think that's helpful, but not always necessary. And I don't like game books that are textbooks. I like them to have some style and be visually exciting without having to say every single picture depicts something that is on the same page with it in text. But that's my take on it.
Yeah,
So
I remember actually, it happened a little bit at V20, because I remember when I was looking for the first proof, I was like, I would not have called that picture for, like, I think it was Auspex, and you're like, well, that's because it was a demontation picture. I'm like, oh, it actually looks really well here, but I didn't realize there was a thing. Or like another one that's like, it was a random piece for the section of the book. I think from a Sabat section, you moved it to the Ghoul section. It just worked so much better there.
Right.
And that's what and that's what you told me that your style of, like, finding the picture that makes the sense.
Right.
Aesthetically, not necessarily a literal sense, and I found there's been some interesting synergies that came from that direction.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it can go, it can go the other way too. But a lot of times, what it tends to do then is if you ever read any of the great Alan Moore's comic book work, one of his favorite things to do is to tell the artist to depict something, and then his writing that he's put into that, usually like as a voiceover or something, the writing is not what is being depicted.
Right.
But the intersection between those two things gives you an entirely different meaning and that's deeper and fuller. And I think you get the same thing with RPG books.
Yeah,
when you
Watchmen is a very good example of the kind of the writing's doing one thing, but the visual's doing another.
Yeah, and then it's a great thing to play off of.
Mm-hmm.
And I find the same thing in RPGs and the way that they can be structured. So yeah, so that's kind of that phase of what we're doing. You guys want to jump in on anything that was going on at that point?
Gosh, I think it'd be easier just to ask specific questions, but
You want to talk about that?
Writing happened. And
Okay. So why don't we get through the how do we make this whole thing come together, and then so that's happening.
Right.
Art's getting made, writing's getting done. We've got our editor lined up. Ethan gets this job. That means that his output gets slower and slower and slower because it's really tough to develop a major RPG book, or even a
Yeah.
tiny thin RPG book, while you're trying to actually work.
Especially when you go from a job where it's like, it's okay to throw 40, 50, 60 hours a week at the book, and then like, I have 2 or 3 hours in the evening to do it, or a weekend to do it. It really changes. I mean, it is an obvious level, like, well, obviously you have less hours, but also it's kind of a mental, it's easier to kind of wake up in the morning, spend all day doing it, and just calling it a day, and then picking it up the next day, versus, okay, I have other things to think about, okay, I have to ramp myself back up to think where I was with this manuscript, and this thing needs, so it's harder to kind of that start and stop.
Yep.
If you're not used to it, it changes the flow of your work, how you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that started taking longer. Most of the artists delivered on time and excellently and wonderfully, because of now licensing the werewolf. I mean the entire all the White Wolf IPs from CCP to do RPG books. There's an approval process that was just kind of being put into place. So there was this huge back and forth I had to do with CCP on all the art. That slowed things down. There's a few pieces we have to go back in on and have some changes made and things. And that then Ron and him being incredibly slow with delivering the full page pieces, and that's not a criticism of Ron because he's putting incredible amounts of care into this. You see the Wendigo piece at the beginning of that. I mean, it's just gorgeous. So that's happening, and John working on the comic in the front. But we know we know what all the pieces are. We know how it's going to come together, and hopefully the book will in fact all be assembled by Aileen Miles, Ethan's wife and longtime werewolf graphic designer, this month. Also this month, simultaneous with that, we hope, that's the way it's supposed to come together, I'm going to go out on a limb and say on Tuesday of next week, we will launch the Kickstarter for Werewolf 20. And if you're not familiar with what that or why we're doing it, let me just explain that last year we did V20. There was a White Wolf store, part of the CCP store, on the website that had all the full capabilities for ordering books. And that's how we pre-ordered V20. This year, before even the whole Onyx Path thing was rolling, CCP pulled all that stuff out of there. They did not want to be in the store business, which is, again, focusing in on we make MMO worlds. That's what CCP does. So we want to bring our focus back into that so we can do that better. Very admirable and awesome thing to do, but it meant that whole apparatus was gone. So we were tasked with the idea of, if we're going to do Werewolf 20, how the hell are we going to get it out there? Are we going to set up a site that has the pre-orders and go through, get all that software and stuff like that? How are we going to do it? At the same time, Justin and I were kicking around looking at these Kickstarters, and this is the beginning of the year. Looking at Kickstarters going, this is pretty freaking cool. And I'm saying, this is actually going to solve what we're trying to do. The thing about it is the Kickstarter is not a pre-order system. And they just put up a post that said, the Kickstarter said, Kickstarter is not your store. Okay? And it's a different way of thinking about it, and I think for fans it's always a harder way to conceptualize it, because for years everyone's gone to the store and picked up White Wolf products. They've gone to Amazon and ordered White Wolf products. They've gone to our place and ordered White Wolf products. Essentially that's the process. What we're encouraging everyone to do is to get involved in the process of making it. We've done 2 Kickstarters so far, V20 Companion and Children of the Revolution. V20 Companion has shipped, and almost everyone has got their copies. A few glitches in the system. And that other one
Children of the Revolution. It's over here.
is at the printer. This is the proof for it. It's what that kind of thing is. This is what they send me, so I can take a look at it and make sure everything's where it's supposed to be and it's looking the way it's supposed to. So next week, Werewolf 20 is going to go up for Kickstarter. There's going to be a lot of fun rewards depending on what you care to pledge. And the pledging is very important. It's not just I'm going to go on and buy the thing. Take a look at the fun sort of things that you can be engaged in if those are the things that you're interested in. If not, then I heartily encourage you to buy. Put the pledge reward tier that gets you the book, because you should really get the book. That's the little ad for that. But I don't think you'd be sitting in here if you weren't interested in the book. So that's kind of where we are. It's very close to being done, and looking very much forward to getting it to a point where we actually get through the Kickstarter and get the thing to press, because it's going to be like yay big. That's the other thing I say on the Kickstarter. I don't know, we haven't really said it out loud, but once the Kickstarter goes live on Tuesday, people will know it's going to be bigger than V20. So it's going to be more pages than Vampire 20. Looking at it, talking to Aileen and to Ethan, I don't know how many that's going to be. It could be 8 more pages. Okay? I swear to God, don't. Rich said it's going to be 690 pages. No.
That was last year.
Yeah. It could be 8 more pages. It could be 32 more pages. It could be 48 more pages. I don't know. So, but yeah, it's gonna be a bit bigger. So, anybody have any questions? I'm gonna start with that guy down there. Not you, Arthur.
Just with you're talking about how you're bringing the setting forward into the 21st century, and you focused with V20, and especially in the companion, more of like how technology impacts vampires and neonates. And now, if we move the time period up, there would be cubs and different younger werewolves that would experience the iPad, the absolute pervasiveness of the Weaver. Will that be reflected in any of the writing and maybe more gifts?
I don't know, Billy, you might be able to have some specifics. I know what the general policy is, which is to kind of do like with V20, is to get us there, not necessarily go through all the permutations that are possible with like the tech and everything like that, and save that for Rage Across the World, which will actually touch on those things more. But now, in terms of the gifts, I know you guys went through a bunch of those with
some of the Glasswalker gifts and stuff like that have been updated a bit, but it's not
scratched out facts and wrote.
Exactly. It's not a pervasive thing that we had to address that, because again, that gets into more detail. Some tribes are going to be less so than others about that stuff, and some people are going to just stop using that stuff once they've had their first change and they realize that's all Weaver crap and they don't want to touch it. So A Rage Across the World is a much better book for really getting into that.
But I do remember when we first started talking about this, one thing I found really interesting is with Vampire 20, Justin put forward, not going to follow through with the sense that the world's changed a bit, and while a lot of the vampire stuff was timeless, there's some bits that kind of need to be updated here and there. When we started talking about Werewolf, Bill was like, hey look, 20 years ago there was this oil company that spilled some oil. People were pissed off about that. That happened. Oh wait. A lot of the things were not only timeless but also really relevant right now. And so it was a case of where it's like not only is this some bits that not only we need to update, but it has come back around and become just as passionately relevant again, like in the past year or so.
And then things like where Pentex evolved into a little more of a cartoonish sort of no big corporation would ever be like that.
Right.
And then we get Halliburton, and then we
exactly. And it's just like no corporation would have their own military force on staff.
Like Blackwater and all that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And if we wrote something like that into one of the things, people go, I don't know, that's a little far-fetched.
Here they go again.
But I remember it was like a game for like the first month we were talking through, because Ethan was like going, hey, they found out that actually jackals do have dog DNA in them, so yeah, suck it, you were right. It just became like finding all these
literally either said yes.
News links. So it was just like going, this is exactly relevant. It was just weird how it all kind of clicked together. It's like, thank you, universe, for making things so terrible that world becomes relevant again.
The world is dark.
It is, but it was very specific. I mean, it was like, vampires like going, vampires can still fit in this world.
Well, it's like
Werewolf is like going, this thing that happened last week makes perfect sense right now.
It's like when you think, like for some reason you got it in your head, yellow Volkswagens, and all of a sudden you see yellow Volkswagens everywhere. They were always driving around. That's fair. It's just what you're filtering the news with.
That's a very valid point.
Or it's the frickin' triad at you. I don't know.
But I mean, the Rage Across the World section does update different places on different situations that are going on right now, and how they're relevant to the groove.
Right. And that's one of those things is that it's really hard. Like, wow, if you know it's going to be in, why didn't you put it in the main book? Well, then we're up to 690 pages again. So that's like the trade-off is we can't fill. I know.
I know you would want that book.
But then again, interesting
of this
stories
podium.
like in Iraq during the Iraq War and stuff, soon after and stuff. There were reports in certain villages of some wolves terrorizing some of these outer villages and stuff. You're like, wow, this is interesting stuff.
Yeah.
This is right out of today in farms.
It is.
Yep.
Which has always been great about our stuff.
This is a little bit more crunch than just the setting thing. Eddie, you mentioned that that you worked on the Renown system.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Is this just going to be an evolution of what was before, or is it more of a rewrite?
It was a bit of a polish. When I sat down and talked to Ethan about the Renown system a little bit, and we ultimately decided that the second edition, the revised system was actually pretty good. But there was this shift where the examples given were very, very vague, and then I think it was the book that came with the screen, gave a lot more detailed examples and actually kind of reworked the Renown system a certain way. So I said, okay, let's use that as the basis, but consolidate all of these pieces together. So I kind of kept the core of the text, so that if you want a simpler, faster Renown system, it's still there. But then the extrapolation to the more detail is also incorporated into the book, and there's like 4 pages of all those incorporated examples I could find from everything. All different books into one synthesized table. Because also there was things like, oh hey, there's a bunch of misprints in that table where there's just Renown words missing, or give it sort of high numbers. So consolidating that and synthesizing it and streamlining it all there. But I mean, it really was more of that companion expanded edition rather than that simplified version revised. But the revised simplified version is still there as a base.
Okay, that's good. I know that was one of the biggest things that we had to figure out how to do on our own.
Right, yeah, and that was
originally there.
that's what I was thinking about, is because I remember I actually ran Werewolf Wild West for a while myself, and that was the frustration I had as a werewolf storyteller, is when you first read the Renown section, it's like, oh, these make sense, blah, blah. Then you start playing the game, it's like, wait, actually these are not very helpful, because there's all these other crazy things my players are doing. And so trying to give a lot more detailed examples so that way from there you can still extrapolate, but it gives you this thing happened, things that are actually happening in games rather than these very kind of vague hand-wavy examples. And so I'm trying to make sure that it's something a little more concrete while still giving the flexibility of really bizarre out there examples are still viable in the system.
Okay.
That's an example of something that needed to be fixed, and that material existed.
Right. It was a matter of
It had
just
to
putting. Yeah, and it was a case of where in the model that we had before, it was we put something out there, the fans would feedback, and then we put out an additional book based off that feedback. Whereas now you kind of, okay, does this make sense? Cool, let's do it and use that. Yeah, that was a case of just taking the evolution of that game and putting it all in one place.
I have multiple questions, but I'll just, for example, the systems with the Renown system that was fixed or translated. Is there any other systems that you felt were a little confusing that ended up changing or?
We did talk about Rage a bit, and Stu had some opinions on tweaking Rage a little bit.
Bit.
But I think we ultimately didn't change that too much. I think it was like we talked ourselves into a circle on that one, didn't we?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of times that the conversations work their way around.
I do know that the gifts were kind of consolidated, and actually some gaps in the gift things, like certain breeds didn't have more. Some breeds had less gifts than others, and did. So like I did know that Holden Shear actually filled in some of those gaps, so that was more parity.
Silent Striders, he updated.
Yeah, Silent Striders stuff because that was out of revised.
Right. His opinion was they need something other than I run really fast, and I run really fast a different way. So,
was there like
Strider.
spirit charms or anything? Do you know what that is?
I don't know off the top of my head.
no.
Because here's what happened is we all sat down with like, we're going to talk about this stuff, and so let's think about this part, digging into it, and a couple weeks later Holden's like, yes, I'm done. Wait, what? Because the man is a machine, and he just cracked out an entire gift chapter in like 2 weeks, and it was solid, so it's just like, okay. I think it was tossed up to open dev, and there was some revision based on open development, but I mean, there wasn't much discussion of it because Holden just had a really strong he was given very strong direction, but he already came in with a very passionate opinion of these are things that need to change. We all agreed to that, but then he just did them and was very, very fast and efficient and put in a really solid structure. So there wasn't much discussion on that.
He did some mini open build on Twitter.
Right.
Post. I want to try this.
Oh, okay, I must have missed that.
Yeah,
Yep.
it was really cool.
It's fun. It's fun to see different ways we can get the communication going on that.
Yeah.
I think the thing that was mostly discussed versus like a lot of systemic work, because again, we had a model with V20
Right.
on how the basic system can work. The additional systems, like we say, sometimes they needed fixing, sometimes they needed compilation, and sometimes they needed to be left the hell alone, even though they were a little weird, because people have already worked out. They've had people for 20 years to figure out how to make this thing work for their personal things. Rip that away. It's rough.
A perfect example of that is Right at the Cup. Jess Hartley was
Is that
like
Drunk Irish charm?
Huh?
Is that the Drunk Irish charm?
No.
It's the right that allowed you to.
Shared gnosis.
Oh, the
Right,
same
yeah.
message. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jess Hartley was like going, so this is a right that it's a live action book, not a tabletop book, but everyone assumes it's a tabletop book because it's just such an obvious thing. And we're like, no, you're totally wrong, Jess. Flip. Wait, you're right. This doesn't exist in tabletop. So it was a case where actually live action inspired thing. But she pointed out like the community already believes this thing to exist, so let's just put that thing that everyone already thinks happens actually in the book. So it's a weird case of like it's like a Monopoly house rule thing. It's like everyone knows these rules, but they're not actually written down. So it's a case we actually could literally write down a rule that everyone already believed to exist.
Which we actually ran into a lot on both these these anniversary editions.
yeah.
That people actually remember it differently than it really is, and we had to kind of figure that out and present it almost. What's the thing if the story is better than the truth, print the story.
Yeah.
Kind of. Okay, well, everybody's doing it that way, then that's a pretty cool thing, and and it's not a real change, even though realistically and the truth of it is it actually is a change, but nobody thinks it is.
Right.
Because of course it was always in there. I was gonna say the one thing that we really ran into mostly wasn't again more of a systemic thing. It was
Tone.
a lot of the writers were very concerned about the tone. Particularly when we were talking about the tribes and whether we were being racist, whether we were being sexist, whether we were making fun of the drunk Irish. I think there's a gift, right, about drinking a lot.
Yeah.
And
days.
whether we should change those things, or whether that's part of what made it all really cool and exciting, 20 years ago.
A lot of discussion about that.
So that went back and forth a lot, and so there'll be little tweaks, little shifts in there, because we didn't want to change anything whole cloth, but there were some things that we just thought would be better if we.
Ethan
tweaked.
kind of described it best, and ultimately, because I remember I was very strongly against this, and Ethan brought me around with the idea of this isn't racist, this is iconic, and trying to tweak the descriptions to move it more towards iconic rather than stereotypical. And I was like, you know what, I'm actually on board with that. And Rich followed up with the thing of, if I've been playing the Glasswalkers say for 20 years, and now these aren't the same Glasswalkers that I played, I don't feel that investment of opening the book for the first time like we're trying to shoot for, that experience of, this is the game I fell in love with. So we have to keep that experience whole, but at the same time, be a little more respectful of the actual cultural stereotypes that we're playing off of, and move them to, the warrior bard versus the drunk Irishman, as it were.
Right. Yep. So that's what we ran into more than anything. Other questions?
Have you guys looked at with the streamlining and stuff as far as the Umbra and Spirit stuff goes, at least initially in the beginning book?
We made the Umbra a whole chapter. I remember we talked about that.
I think it is. Isn't
Yep.
it?
Yeah. Well, I remember there was something about that we talked about expanding it. I remember we talked specifically about the Umbra needs to be a separate chapter. We expanding the Spirit World, but I don't remember that went to somebody else's hands. I don't remember exactly how that panned out.
I haven't seen the final on that.
I do remember we also made explicit the decision of we weren't going to necessarily worry about how that impacted Mage.
Right.
Because we didn't use the Werewolf Umbra, if it's different from the Mage Umbra, whatever, because this is about the Werewolf experience. I remember that discussion specifically.
Yeah.
There's the initial discussion at least was like, getting back a little more towards the shamanistic feel of the spirits and the nature spirit elements. I don't know how that translated through the writing and the development of it, but that was the initial idea, was that this is what made Werewolf cool. Again, the fact that, what was cool about Werewolf, this is what made Werewolf cool. The meta plot of all the intricate spirit worlds, that's much more of an age thing, so let's not really worry about that with Werewolf. Let's just really focus on this particular aspect of it and emphasize that. And I know Ethan was on board with that, but I don't know how that actually translated in the final manuscript.
But, so, kind of an answer.
Will we see tribal flaws in the core book or Rage Across the World?
How did that turn out? No.
Or if it would be in the back of the book.
I thought,
I think we did have a discussion.
We talked about that.
But I can't remember what we came up with, so I don't.
I do. Hey,
finally
step back. I know we have camps. I know camps are going to be in the book. And actually, Jess Hartley did a write-up that expanded some of the camps that were kind of given short shrift and expanded on those. We talked about tribal flaws, at the same time talked about nature and demeanor. And Ethan originally did not want nature and demeanor in because it wasn't part of the core book. He turned around and added nature and demeanor in. I believe flaws were part of that discussion.
Yeah, I know we talked about them because there were some problems with some of them.
Right.
But I cannot remember what the outcome of.
I want to say
I think we decided to change or tweak some of them.
I think we also. I want to say we nixed them for the Rage book because Stu had some opinions on it, but we didn't have time to dig into it. That's why I kind of want to say happened.
Right.
I think Stu said, "Why don't we go ahead and talk about this in a different book?" But because it was, again, is it part of the core experience, and we weren't entirely sure.
Right.
But I remember it being tied into, because nature and demeanor, because I remember piggybacking off of that and saying nature and demeanor is a similar case. It's not in the core book, but everyone assumes it is. And that, to us, that was a case of everyone's using these anyway. That was similar, everyone thinks it's in the book, and everyone's surprised when they find it not there. So I think Ethan kind of came around to that. But I think tribal flaws, not something that's necessarily we didn't feel it was as necessarily as inherent. So I want to say we did not go with that, and there's probably an appendix proving me wrong. So expect disappointed and be surprised when it's not true. But that being said, I mean, as Stu works on the Rage book, I mean, certainly we should kind of, hey, what about flaws and on the blogs and see where that's at, because if nothing else, it is a fantastic addition for one of the supplemental books.
Tom?
So I have a more of a large scale question. To what degree is the success of Werewolf 20 going to affect the release of, say, Mage 20 or future products down the line? I know that when Vampire 20 came out and was released, it was the huge theme of Grand Masquerade, and it was already done and printed, and everybody said that Werewolf would be the focus of the next White Wolf fan get together. And unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, Werewolf isn't ready just yet.
Right.
But I wonder how much of the success and hype of Vampire played into the development of Werewolf, and if that's the case, then it seems reasonable to me to assume that the success of Werewolf will impact the success of Mage, will impact the success of the next ones, and all that.
So there's two answers. The first one is that yes, that's always been our party line, which is that we need to see how the fan reaction is to Werewolf 20 before we can absolutely greenlight Mage 20. However, that being said, the use of the Kickstarter process actually kind of shifts some of that, in the sense that now we can actually see before we do the thing if there's going to it's still a huge undertaking. These anniversary editions are just gigantic. In terms of expense, in terms of just the sheer effort of putting them out. It's not something that be done lightly, but we can, if it's things like a Rage Across the World, or the things before that, which is the Changing Breeds book, we could feel much more comfortable greenlighting those than we did back when we were doing the V20 Companion, and have a better be able to say, okay, we can do a book this size, because we've had the experience of doing Kickstarter, and that's a way for people to let us know, are they excited and interested in it. So, and it's going to be much more of a direct thing too. People who get Werewolf 20 in its deluxe form are going to be aware of Kickstarter. It's the only way they can do it, right? So that will feed into then those next books coming out. Mage is still a huge thing as a new core one, so can't say yes, absolutely. We'll just throw it out there and see how Kickstarter does. Instead, we're gonna see how Werewolf does, which we'll know
Right.
probably by mid next month. We
but I
might know
will see.
after the first couple days of this Kickstarter.
Right. But I will say more explicitly that Werewolf 20th would not have happened if it was not for what happened with Vampire 20th. Because we were blown away. I mean, Justin was one of the people like, when this absolute book needs to happen, it's going to be amazing. And certainly a lot of us were behind the idea, but we're just like, yeah, a couple thousand people will buy it, it'll be awesome. And then we were like, you know what, I think we could be aggressive about how many people are going to buy this. And even that aggressive estimate was blown out of the water. We were just amazed at how people gravitated to it. And so it was like, okay, well then let's do a supplemental book and see how that goes. Again, V20, a lot of response to it. It wasn't quite the same response, but it was a lot of response. And then when we started talking and floating the idea of Werewolf 20, again, we got a similar kind of visceral, rawr, this is a great thing to do. So absolutely the community response has been the reason why these follow-up books have happened. And it all started with that initial kind of huge swell of response to V20. But it should not be assumed that the de facto, well then, my favorite game, 20th, is going to happen, because it really depends on the business and how each piece comes together.
So to sort of follow up and complete my question then is, it wasn't clear to me as a consumer the amount to which my support of V20 or my going to Grand Masquerade and purchasing the deluxe edition and all that stuff, it wasn't immediately clear to me that that money also goes at least a little bit in terms of showing fans support or whatever supports the Werewolf project. So in Kickstarter then, when you throw Werewolf 20 on there, mage players might say, I never liked Werewolf, and why should I pay for it? When in fact, if you do buy it, a little bit at least of that consumer edge, your numbers go up, and that makes it more likely that you make.
Always a good thing. I think that's a good point, and maybe something we can add to the Kickstarter page, in the FAQ or something. I know Art's done an incredible job of letting people know, if you want mage, you gotta get Werewolf. All over our forums and our blogs, so it's
and something else
definitely
that
out there.
I've talked about a few times is I think there's this myth that has grown up that there are fans that like one game line and nothing else. And I really have come to believe over years of being part of the community that there's White Wolf fans, and the average White Wolf fan seems to have a few games that they like. And so, while there's not that explicit, if you don't buy Werewolf, there won't be Mage, I do think there's a lot of people who liked the experience of buying V20 and being part of V20 and rolled right over to Werewolf 20. And they may or may not be passionate Werewolf fans, but it's just like, I really like the experience, I really like that 20th anniversary thing, and I'm a White Wolf fan, so I want to pick up this game. So I certainly see where you're coming from. I think it's valid, and certainly ways to help communicate that, but at the same time, I do think there's just a lot of fans who are like, I love the World of Darkness collectively, and I'm happy to buy this game on my shelf, and just because I think it's awesome.
Yeah. The other thing I did want to point out is, since we have Matt sitting here, is that we're talking about Kickstarter and Werewolf 20, you gotta go and get it. And the fact is, these are deluxe editions. They're expensive. It's expensive to make, and so they're expensive for you guys to pay out for. It's going to exist on drive-through in PDF and print-on-demand form, just like V20 did too. So don't
or
feel
the V20 companion.
Don't feel pressured. Yeah, like there's a V20 companion and it's print-on-demand form. It's not deluxe. It's a book. It's a cool book. So there's a lot of reason to get the deluxe. They look like this, but they will exist on drive-through, and that if you're happy with the PDF in a much less expensive version. So, any other questions before we wrap up? I'm gonna wait on you. Go ahead.
Kind of a follow-up to his question, and this is putting the cart before the horse. But is there any consideration at all to, if it is successful or if there's enough demand with Kickstarter, to do any live action?
So the license to do live action books is a separate thing.
Okay.
And it's currently being negotiated. So I imagine there will be. I think there should be, but it's not. There's no definite thing I could say right now. Yes.
You worked with your brother on the comic.
Yep.
How was it developing the comic with him with something that's so iconic both to Werewolf the Apocalypse and to presenting sort of this story? Were you developing it as a introduction for people who haven't, or was it more of a this is for the advanced viewer who's already followed the story along, and you getting to develop a advanced?
Well, I certainly hope it can be read by people who don't know anything about this. The assumption was people who are buying this book already know Werewolf. They're coming back to it. That this is a celebration of old style Werewolf. So it was definitely made in the vein of the old sort of comics and fiction we used to do for that.
I don't remember reading through the scripts seeing anything that was like, hey, you're like a Hamid, and that's a human form.
Yeah.
It was pretty much
I tried to get away from any of that kind of exposition.
pretty much a good story, no exposition, jumping right in and
Right.
Was it fun developing with your brother then?
Oh yeah.
Well, they share one mind. They're twins.
He
They're
was the hand
twins.
I did.
Who's using it now?
He's dormant at the moment.
With the paintbrush.
Looking to draw.
Yeah.
So you might call this, then go into the retrospective?
I have one more thing. We could. Good. Art's got another question.
I got tons of them put up.
Yeah, I have one or two too.
Well, let's go to you instead, because I'm tired of him.
Hey, that's cheating.
Well, I wrote them on the same page. So yeah.
Fair enough.
And this just might be my perspective on it, but I always felt that some of the starting Gnosis, Rage, Willpower, like you can skew your character based on what you choose to the point where I think somebody actually went through and found out that like a Lupus, a Rune, Stargazer has like the best starting
Flies across.
everything.
Sure.
And I think I've had players in my games certainly who are like, I don't want to play that, I don't start with enough, whatever. Is there any plans to possibly balance that, or to just leave it as is?
I don't know what Ethan tweaked on that stuff. I don't think
he made a change.
The idea was to try to keep it more the change. I mean, the idea with the past was, you can mini-max these things, sure. But it is a storytelling game, and so if you're going to play a Stargazer, play a Stargazer. And, if you're not playing like a Stargazer because all you wanted were the points starting out, well, that's your storyteller's job to then kind of keep reminding you that, you chose a Stargazer, you're playing a Stargazer.
Right. I think that goes back to kind of that classic experience idea. I mean, trust me, if we had our druthers, I'm sure that even with Vampire, it'd been awesome to go through and get a bunch of stuff and say, this is terrible and whatnot. But again, the feedback we're getting during the opening up process was, my experience of the game is so shaped by these mechanics. And so it's not a case of replacing mechanics and making them better, but more tweaking those mechanics that way they flow a little smoother. They work the way you kind of think they should, but we're not taking that core experience away. And part of that experience for Apocalypse, for good or for ill, is that there's these wildly varying amounts of Gnosis, willpower, and whatnot. So Rage. So I mean, it's. I don't think we even I don't think we didn't discuss it, because I think that kind of went in our mental bucket of this is part of the core experience.
One of the examples that we've used and we've come back to, we had to do this with the whole writing team because, like I said, writers want to improve and
Right.
change things.
Right.
Is you're not writing 4th edition Werewolf the Apocalypse. Okay. In either way you want to take that. You're not writing the 4th edition of this. You're writing the anniversary edition, which is going back to it, not innovating over here and fixing those sorts of things.
Yeah, when I wrote an example play, it'd been the first time for a very long time that I actually revisited those old rules, because I had since then done the revised, World of Darkness rulebook for, that went with Requiem and Forsaken and all that other stuff. And even though it's a similar rule set, it's different. Its mechanics are more sound in some ways. It's very streamlined. And then to go back to Werewolf, it's like, whoa, blast from the past. This is so different. Whoa, that many dice? Holy smokes.
Soaking shifting difficulties? What is this heresy?
I'm rolling so many times. But then it started to come back so quick once you actually get back into it.
The storyteller will determine. And
Let's see, the difficulty is 9 this time. What?
Why? Just because.
No, not this time.
No.
We have an exception. Do you have another question?
Yes, he does.
Don't read any of ours.
I have always been very inspired by the artwork of World of Darkness, insert book title here, but especially Werewolf, and it's actually affected the things that I like to draw to the point where I would draw werewolves pretty much 23 out of 24 hours a day. Is there a way to still contribute to either the current book or upcoming projects, or even other books that mention werewolves? Because I feel like I would love to be able to just throw artwork for the free at you guys.
Okay. Well, so the idea is, because there's also artists that I would have loved to have had on Werewolf that I think would have been really appropriate for Werewolf, right? But they weren't old Werewolf artists.
Right.
So for the core book, old Werewolf artists. And just like V20, it's going to be just a load of beautiful new stuff. But there's also going to be, classic pieces in black and white from the original books. Most significantly, of course, the flip book of Doom, which is Josh Timbrook's
Oh, that's a book of Doom.
battle between Mari and Albrecht, before we even knew who the hell they were. So that's going to be in there again, which is going to be awesome. But then once we move into doing Changing Breeds, because I haven't art directed Changing Breeds yet, just to cover Brereton, and then Rage Across the World and stuff like that. Sure, yeah, we can. We're definitely looking. If you look at Children of Revolution, where we've got all new artwork, and it's from a whole bunch of guys that were definitely not the old school, but there's Drew Tucker's in there, and Michael Gaidos did some beautiful pieces in this book. So I mean, those are classic vampire artists. So we're moving. Once you get the core big retrospective book out, then kind of all bets are off for that. So yeah, send me some stuff.
I would love to. I just don't have anything with me right this second. But if I can grab your email, I can send you a bunch of stuff later.
Yep, it's easy. Okay, we need to move to the next panel. So everybody
Here,
kind of
take a break for a few
move your
minutes.
seats around. Thank you guys. Thanks so much.